Thank you very much, Ms. Nahid. I'm so honored to be here with you today, and I'm very happy to be again at the New York University in Abu Dhabi. I just have to add to what Nahid's mentioned that I'm now also advisor to the DCT, to the Department of Culture and Tourism. So I'm also more available in Abu Dhabi. I'm so happy to be with you all, and I would like to start my presentation, which I think you have seen the title. So I will go directly to highlight the importance and significance of cultural heritage in this part of the world in particular, but also I'm going to talk about the past, the present and the future, and how they're linked together, or how we can, as planners and as architects, we can work on that together with everyone who has a stake in preserving cultural heritage. Before I start, I just want to tell you a very interesting story, because I came across, I was teaching, as Nahid introduced me, one of the students that we had at one point came to me and said, we were teaching conservation, so he said, I want to conserve this tree. And I said, this tree? What is this tree? So he said, this tree is important in Cairo. It's called the Virgin's Tree of Egypt. And we, as Coptic, but also as Muslims, we have certain affiliation with this tree. We celebrate, we come during, Eid and Christmas and occasions to come here around this tree. This tree was about to die. So, and it's a very old tree, one of the oldest trees. It's sycamore tree, by the way, and we want to revive it. So I thought, wow, this is a very interesting project. I never came across such a proposal from a student to work on such a project. So in fact, he worked on that, and as you see here, the tree symbolizes this relation with the land, this relation with the meaning that it holds for the people of Egypt, being Muslims and Christians, and it is so enriching to think about that, to see how we can link also this tree to people, to link it to the place, how it becomes a heritage in itself to the people. So with that, I would like to start by linking what I'm going to talk about with this story. So I found it amazing, and in fact he managed to make this happen. So they revived, and it's very difficult, of course, to deal with a nearly dead tree, but in fact it came back to life by careful attention and by giving care to this tree. And this is what we do in the field of cultural heritage. So let me start by talking a little bit about the past. I don't know how many of you are from the cultural heritage field, but please, I'm sure many of you who are will be, somehow this information will be quite straightforward. But those who are not will find it probably quite new. So we have different places in the world, and these places and monuments, cities, historic cities mean a lot to us. So this is just a combination of the different types of heritage that you see here on the screen, ranging from historic monuments to cities to industrial heritage and archaeology, etc. So the range and the diversity of cultural heritage in terms of tangible heritage and immovable heritage are quite varied. In the Arab region, we have a lot of important cities and historic cities in this part of the world, ranging from Cairo to Fez to Tunis to Damascus, that you see here on the screen, but also we have amazing architecture, such as this one that you see here in Shibam in Yemen, but also an amazing cultural landscape when you go across the region. This is also a city from the south of Syria in Bosra, where the archaeology is mixed with the vernacular. So it was quite an interesting project to work at the time, before, you know, the problems that they faced, how to encourage tourism also to this place. But also we talk about the other side of heritage, the intangible. And I think the intangible heritage is so important, and we cannot really say this is tangible and this is intangible. They are actually together, they work together, and they mean together something for the people who you know, own such type of heritage. Shibam again, Cairo and the mosques in Cairo, the minarets that are very famous, the urban fabric that you can see here in many cities, and the diversity of heritage that you can see also on the screen. What I want to start to talk about today is how we recognize that this is heritage. The recognition that this is heritage is the very first step to know that this is heritage. We can consider nowadays the modern heritage of Abu Dhabi, like you see here on the lower left side of the screen. The modern heritage is really essential for the city of Abu Dhabi. So we never thought of that, you know, 50 years ago, let's say, because these were new constructions at the time. And I think this actually is embedded to the fact that we ascribe significance. We see that the cultural significance is the key towards, you know, having a meaning for this heritage to the people that own it. So cultural heritage is related, the word heritage comes from inheritance, and it is something that ranges from physical to intangible, as I said, but all such significance and values have attributes to them. So we could save them by knowing what how their values are held, and how they are related to the meaning of this heritage. So I mentioned the tangible, the intangible, but also there is also the natural heritage that is part of that. The idea of significance is really at the heart of recognizing heritage. Cultural significance, the word significance comes from the word sign, and we can maybe think of a pile of stone, as you see here on the screen. It's a sign, but it doesn't mean anything. Okay, it's a pile of stone. But if you think more about it, you could say that this signifies a location of a road over a pass. And if you think a little bit more, then you could say that this has a significance from the word sign, because it's a road mark and it has a value, and the value is the fact that it is essential for travelers. So this is the concept of cultural significance, and how we start by thinking that this is heritage or not. So the word significance is also related to the word meaning. So this means something to us. It's a symbol, it's a sign, it represents something to us. Whereas the value is is how this is related to our value system, or our perceptions, and how we can conserve it as a society. So the society, if they recognize that this is their heritage, then it is the first step. So these are very basics, but I think they are essential to keep in mind when we talk about the idea of the meaning. And this definition about the protection comes from there, and the conservation of cultural heritage is really related to the fact that if we know the significance, the meaning, or the messages that a place or an object has, then we are able to say, like, we need to protect it and we need to conserve it. This is one of the best definitions that we have. It's actually the former Director General of ICCROM, where I used to work for 21 years, as Nahid mentioned. So this is a definition embedded in the word meaning. So if these places mean to us, then we are then able to think, how we will protect them. So the why is really important, I felt, in this lecture before we embark into the what and the how. So in order to do that, we protect, we do restoration of buildings. These are images from restoration projects I was involved in for many years in Sudan. Unfortunately, the situation now is not really helping, but I mean, these are important places as we worked on them. This is the protection of the, in the city of Monster. It's a restoration after the war. So people have a certain meaning for this bridge because it connects their city. And the city, in fact, has a Christian part and a Muslim part, and this bridge actually makes this work. So this bridging is important in terms of meaning for the people of Monster. This is another project. When we talk about preservation, also we talk about conserving buildings. In places like in the Gulf, this is the city of Muscat. It's also another project that I was involved in, the restoration of the ruling family of the old city of Muscat, what took place, and we tried to bring it back to life for visitors and for the people of the Sultanate of Oman to really learn more about their heritage, how people used to live, etc. So we worked on that. We had, of course, this was a very important project because it had the place where the current Sultan used to live, so it was quite important. So I want to mention these actions that we do. We conserve, we protect, we restore, we maintain in terms of, how we can maintain buildings of earthen architecture, of stone, how we can maintain other types of objects that we can find in many places, such as this one in Africa, how restoration actually becomes a very technical aspect and technical field. This is again another site from the UAE. We were involved in it's an archaeological site of a Dur in Al Quwain, and how material means a lot in the sense of attributes to the value of this place, because this material is the only one through which we can read the monument as archaeologists, and we can understand, the meaning of this temple from the 1st century, which is a very unique site, by the way. And then we go to other more recent heritage. These are experiments we had in buildings built from coral stone in the UAE. These are pictures from the restoration work, the sampling, etc. in the city of Sharjah. But of course, we can also talk about restoring streets. This is Al Mu'azz Street in Old Cairo, and how we bring it back to life. Restoring meaning not only the material, but also in this case, it's the livelihood of the area. We can also talk about cities in general and how we bring back the cities to life, how people can enjoy it, how these buildings mean a lot to people, how we cannot sometimes separate the city from the life, so the intangible aspects from it. So this was actually about the past, preserving the past, and how the significance guide us as to how we put effort and strategies to build, to conserve the past. In the present, these places face a lot of changes, and this is the title of my talk today. So how we can deal with the changes and the pressures that we have. We can see several places, such as the place we are in, Abu Dhabi, the city, how it was, how it became, the then and now. When the UAE was founded, you could see the difference and how we can maybe think of conserving parts which were not demolished after the oil boom of the Gulf, and how we can look at this change. How we can This is from Dubai, an archaeological site of Jumeirah, and looking towards the new city of Dubai, and everybody knows Dubai, I'm sure. So how we can also conserve this archaeology, and we can still look for the future. What I want to say here is preservation is not only about the past. Although I mentioned that we protect, it's about the future. So preservation, it's something that people don't really perhaps think about, like this is something from the past. We don't want to have it fossilized or musified or frozen. We need to think how we can work on it to make sense or make it relevant to our to ourselves, but also to the future. These are also some pictures from the city of Sharjah, the old part, which you can see here on the creek, and how the city developed because of the planning, which actually the planners who were involved in this part of the world at that time came from outside, and they affected, the planning of a city. In this case, they in fact built this main street, which is called the Bank Street, in the middle of the historic city, and you see the buildings around, and that divided the two parts of the old city. So this is actually very typical of a Gulf city. This is a picture from how we could read the past and how we relate it to the future, and how we can think about the city's evolution. This is the city of Montreal, where they kept the historic elements and they continued building for the future. However, this heritage is very much endangered by various aspects. One of them is urban development, and perhaps urban development, when we talk on the World Heritage, and I have my colleagues here on the World Heritage level, the urban development is really perhaps the most pressing aspect of change. So how do we mitigate this change? How we can change, the routes here in the roads in Lebanon. Unfortunately, Lebanon now is facing problems, but there is an archaeological site, so how we can divert the highways so that we can protect the archaeological site of Nahr al-Kalb in this case. But so change can occur for various reasons. One of them is urban development. The other one that we talk about a lot at this time, and last year we had the COP28 held also in the UAE. We talk about the climate change and the global warming and how it will affect our cities. This, of course, we can see some examples. The city of Venice, which is maybe the very good example to show, because of the high water level, the aqua alta that comes and affects the historic treasures of the city. We had also floods here in the UAE. This image actually is from Dubai, and not very long time ago. So how we deal with that? Are we ready? We have heritage to protect, and we have places which we care for. Could be also archaeology, not only cities, so we need to find a way to protect them. This is the city of Mosul in Iraq, where, after the war. So conflict is another reason where we have destruction. We had monuments that existed. This is the case of the Al-Nouri Mosque. It was destroyed, if you all know. The UAE put a lot of effort to reconstruct and help the Iraqi people to reconstruct, and we were actually helping in the technical aspects of this reconstruction, which is a different, very specific field, which we also tried to address during my previous work at ICCROM with publications to show how we can do that. So these are also other images, not only from the mosque, but also from the churches in Mosul, other images from Beirut, from Samarra in Iraq, and from Egypt after the revolution, the Arab Spring, at the museums. Also objects were destroyed in the museums. In Syria, we had also destruction of the city of Aleppo with a mosque. We can learn a lot from the experiences we had from Europe after the Second World War, where many cities were destroyed. People cared about their cities, so there was a lot of effort of how we reconstruct them. All right, so there are Now, up to now, I mentioned a few threats that we need to be ready. So this is change. Change also, as I said, I talked about urban development, but there is also urbanization. There is also increase in the population in the cities where we live. 55% of the global population live in cities, and by 2050, we will be having 70% of the people, putting pressure on all these cities with the traffic that we have, with the pollution, with all the problems that come with the increased number of people living in cities. So the threats to cultural heritage are numerous, and as I mentioned, some of them I tried to highlight. The issues that we face mainly are you can see here on the screen, but I think one of the important things that I need perhaps to add from this slide is sometimes we have unsustainable use of resources, and we are talking about climate change, so how we can be environmentally friendly, for example, how we can develop standards, how we can plan for growth, and how we can address, as I mentioned, disasters, conflicts, and also addressing the needs of the people. Sometimes we have poor places in these historic areas, and how we deal with that. The Sustainable Development Goals guide us in a way as to how we could, plan our objectives and our goals. Goal 11 is really addressing the issues of cities in general and communities. And we cannot talk about cities without the communities as a principle, because, we are trying to address the needs, the safety, the sustainability, the resilience of cities for the people who live there. So this change, the change is inevitable. The change, we know what change is. It's a change, you can say, when something is different of what it was, something that is not always perceived negatively. Sometimes it could be a positive change, but a change is inevitable sometimes in the life cycle of any system and is part of our daily life. So there is a way how we will deal with such change and such development as it occurs, and such risks in many cases, how we can contribute and try to address these changes. We can only improve by going forward. We cannot go backward, and this is why preservation is about the future. And when we embrace it, our growth becomes easier and better. So change is part of our daily lives. I think you all agree with me that the change is part of life, and every moment something changes. Every day we change as well. We ourselves change. So this means that learning how to adapt, and the word adaptation is really important, to change is one of the most essential skills in life. Abu Simbel temple, when it was transferred in the 20th century, it caused, the dam which was built at the time caused a lot of damage to the monuments, and it was a major change. So the entire site was carefully cut and into large blocks, and it was moved to another area. It was lifted, assembled, and this is how we addressed this change and this effect of the new dam which was built at the time. So as a first step, we need to accept change. We need to accept change because it's inevitable, as I said, and it will become and it will happen. You get to prepare yourself. We often are not well prepared, but because sometimes we feel we cannot stop it from happening. And when we are faced with a change we don't like, we should ask ourselves, how will this make us better? What can we learn from this for the future? And how can we use it to our advantage? Some of the examples that we need in our daily life is also, for example, in urban environments and cities, is to facilitate transportation. We said there's increase in population, we need to have people moving. So this is the case of the city of Algiers, where they wanted to develop a metro line. So underneath, of course, it's in the historic city, as you see on the left hand of the screen, but it has a lot of archaeology underneath. So how we deal with that? Of course, we have to develop a method which is actually now is well developed. It's called preventive archaeology or rescue archaeology, where we can rescue the objects, the monuments, and we can document them for the future posterity. So this is one example. So many settlements throughout the world have been greatly affected by this rapid urbanization, unsustainable development, and deterioration of the urban quality. So our aim, coming back to this idea of cultural significance, and sometimes when it comes to World Heritage, we call it outstanding universal value or significance, we need to deal with change. In one way, we are planning we are embarking into what is called on the left-hand side here, on the right-hand side, conservation planning, and how we deal with the change to keep this significance that we ascribe to the cultural heritage. And on the other hand, we think about how we assess the impact of this change. So this means that protection and conservation and preservation of cultural heritage is a topic of managing change. All right, so far so good? All right, so for the future, we also have to think. I said preservation is about the future, it's not only about the past. Again, back to Abu Dhabi, Al Husn, maybe many of you know the place, and Al Husn went through a lot of upgrade in the area, and then it became a place where people celebrate their heritage. Everybody knows Al Husn Festival, I guess, and here where we can celebrate our traditions, that would remind us of the significance of this place. So what we aim to do is to think about the past and the future. Sometimes we have sudden change, and we need to think about the transition phase. And in the present, there is, as I said, there is change. So our aim is to find how we could move smoothly in this transition phase to reduce the risks, to reduce the impact of changes, to ensure that we have sustainable development and we are managing adequately the change. Sorry. So the idea of urban conservation for specialists who are, and I actually do teach this now at the university, the idea was, in general, was always thinking about the past is something that is in a past. You know, this is why I'm trying to say, like, this has changed. Even there's an evolution of the field where we originally thought these are monuments, these are sites, but now we are talking about living cities and cultural landscapes. We were talking about restoration, freezing, keeping, protecting, as you do, you know, the food in the refrigerator. Now we are talking about urban regeneration, managing processes of change. We used to talk about, you know, it's only one discipline that is specialized in restoration. Now we talk about integrated participatory planning, where, because we are dealing with people, people have a say. We are not alone as experts. And we move from protection of buildings to preservation of urban values. And I talked about values and significance already. The cultural site of Al Ain, which is a World Heritage, the only World Heritage site in the UAE, is an important site. It has diverse assemblages of sites, being it historic buildings, archaeology, and the oasis, which is so essential of how the place have evolved and have grew in time. So these are the 4 assemblages. As I said, you have archaeological sites, oasis, and also an area called Bida bint Saud. The variety of significant places or properties or landmarks are important, including the oasis itself with the Falaj system, which was the life of Al Ain. And maybe many of you know Al Ain comes from the word spring, and it came from this idea of having water in the site, a fertile land that we need to keep. So significance in this area means that we have really to think about the life. Our people, of course, abandoned these places. You can see here the type of the oasis that we have. It's important because it's the date, the palm trees are important also for the culture. It's also listed on the intangible cultural heritage. So how we deal with that, how we deal with the change. People left the place. The Falaj system is still functioning. People look after these places, but how we can make them more meaningful to people, how we can protect them, and how we can have people understand or recognize, as I said, recognize their significance, and how they can take care of them without, putting some pressure on new development, new buildings that are proposing, taking permits from the municipality, which is creating a lot of dynamic with the DCT. So how we deal with that. Another similar site is Bahla in Oman. And this is also an oasis site. Everybody talks about it as the fort. And it's not really the fort that is important, although everybody thinks that it's the fort. It is the ecosystem that exists. So we are talking here about a cultural landscape, an interaction between man and the environment, and how we need to conserve that. So how do we really understand the meaning? How we look into understanding the attributes of such places is really, really essential, so that we are then, by doing so, we will understand how we protect them. If we know where the significance, in other words, lies. In these places, historic cities, as I mentioned, you have people, you have markets, you have intangible heritage within the cities. People dance, people celebrate, people have festivals. So we reached a stage where we think that we are not only the experts who would protect this heritage. We need really to think about the community. We need to think also about the policymakers, and for them, other people who are not specialized in the heritage field, how we will make this system works together. It's of course it's easy said than done, because in reality people are not really aware of this notion of significance of the place, even if they are sometimes policymakers, of course. The key principles of the new approach that we are trying to talk about today is how we can address change with continuity, conservation versus management of change, as I said. How we will have a new understanding of the historic environment as a layering of cultural and natural values and attributes. The landscape approach to urban heritage is the new it's something that we started in the early 2000s. We did not call it that way. We call it at the time integrated urban conservation, but then it evolved with UNESCO that they call it now urban historic landscape, and they have special recommendations for that. So how we think of a place of a different layers. There is the geology, there is the topography, there is the archaeology, there is the hydrology, there is the land use, and there is also the social and cultural practices that take place in this place. And there are also the economic processes. People sell dates in Al Ain, how we can work with that. There is also diversity of cultures living in a place, in a cultural landscape, how we can address the diverse community groups. So these are all key principles of the approach of how we can bring and manage the change. So integrating heritage in the larger framework of urban planning and development is so essential. And we need to look at fostering a culture-driven urban development. Culture-driven meaning also people-driven, and people of different types. And we need to also to promote creativity and welcoming the contemporary architecture. We are not making these places, as I mentioned, frozen in time. We need to build new architecture, how this would be harmonious to the urban environment. We are not against development. So I was actually telling my colleagues who are working in these places, please, we should not stop people of developing these places. I mean, we can develop them, but we have to explain to them that we have to develop them carefully. So this is actually a challenge. One of the examples that I found quite interesting when we talk about creativity is the restoration of Mohammed bin Khalifa House in Al Ain, where they have also new architecture added, very sensitive additions, not affecting the old structure. So this is what I mean by creativity. Also, we can think about other case studies. This is a case study from Cairo, where they converted this mountain, which was really a place for garbage, into a park, which is next to the historic city. This was done by the Aga Khan Trust for Culture and the Historic Cities program. And it actually brought back life to the place, to the city, for the people. So these actually essential ways of how we can implement and how we can manage this change. This wall, the wall of Cairo, historic Cairo, became actually the bridge. It was not anymore a wall. It's the bridge linking, you know, the historic area to the park that I just shown you. So there was a lot of work involving the community in this work and restoring buildings, but thinking of it in a very in an approach that I have just mentioned, in a holistic approach. And we take care of the people. The people now are enjoying the place. So how we can make this place meaningful to people. It is a meaningful place anyway, but it was a dump of garbage. How we, by doing that, we have also private public partnership with other institutions to make sure that this is well managed. So people are at the heart of everything we talk about when we talk about development. So we need to think about people, how people can be engaged from the beginning, not at the very late stage. Another example that we looked at with my colleagues at ICCROM at the time is how we could look at traditional knowledge. Traditional knowledge can inform us how we deal with these challenges. So this is a case from Egypt where they built a high dam and they wanted to stop the flooding of the Nile. So they looked at how, you know, the nature and the human environment worked and how we can adapt to this change by using traditional ways of addressing these challenges. In this case, this, of course, is the delta of the Nile. It's known to be the bowl of food or food bowl of Egypt, and how, you know, this traditional knowledge actually existed for millennia, and how we could reutilize this by engaging the people who are still practicing a lot of the way of doing things in the place. So the indigenous people are important in this case, and having worked on different, you see even how they are building the boats the same way the Egyptians did. So how we could use this technical knowledge in order to address that. So this is called Haya, which means life in Arabic. and how they tapped into traditional knowledge to plant sycamore trees again to remove the soil salinity and revive the practice of cultural gatherings and cultural practices on the site. So they also developed an early warning system for risks using this traditional knowledge, and they eventually are working on that to inform intergenerational transformation of knowledge for the next generations. Because of the situation, they looked into, at the time this project was not ended, they looked at engineering solutions to address this, and they are going to introduce the traditional knowledge that they have in order to address these challenges. When we talk about the same approach, we talk about how we integrate culture and nature, and I mentioned that when I give the example of the oasis, but also we can look into traditional knowledge in the sense of architecture. Those who are familiar with architecture or who are architects can really associate with that. There are a lot of practices that we can learn from, how the architectural traditions in the region were important to address climate conditions. These are, for example, the screens that were used to address issues of daily light. Here are some analysis of that and how we could bring that, this idea of the mashrabiyya, or it's called something else, I think, Roshan in Jeddah. How we can bring that, how we can study, the interaction with the environment. The other aspect that we could find here in this part of the UAE is the use of the wind towers. The wind towers are actually effectively, they provide ventilation, they could provide passive solutions to address environmental conditions, and they could maybe be we cannot only rely totally on energy consumption. We could also look into solutions like these. The courtyard as a concept also in the Arab world was also used. These are all climate solutions that were also, they are already there, but we forgot about them in many places, in many cases, how we can look into this to address environmental conditions. This is the urban forms that we had, for people, how to move, how we could utilize the energy to move water. This is from Syria. Many, I think some of you know that, the water wheels. How we could look into how can these places become places of learning for us to learn from and inform us what we can do for the future. The materials, the composition, we don't have maybe to use the same, but we can analyze, we can really understand how it worked. How it worked for people also who were engaged in maintaining these places, such as this Jannah Mosque in Mali, or these places in the Oasis, or in places like Shibam, which I just showed to you. Many of the places that we had were earthen architecture in this part of the world. There are about 150 of them listed on World Heritage only from this region. So what do we do with that? I mentioned the wind towers. They are worth looking at. You can find them in Dubai. Sometimes they are reconstructing them as symbolic without any function. In this part of the world, this idea of wind tower came from Iran, and the city, the origins from, this is the city of Maibod in Iran. They brought that because of the strong relations and trade at the time. They had built Dubai on the creek using these techniques, in addition to Arish structures that you can see here on the screen. So these are environmental solutions that we could study and we can look at. As I mentioned, courtyards in these places of the UAE, the screens that I just mentioned, even the wind tower in a different, cheaper shape for the Arish constructions. And there were some studies evaluating actually at the university, academic studies looking into the effectiveness and how it relates to the wind speed, to the orientation, to the height of windows, etc. So there are detailed studies in that. There are simulations which were done using a wind tunnel in Australia. This was done by my colleague, actually, Peter Jackson, who is now in Sharjah. And how we could study, the wind movement, how we make sure that, we could relate the wind movement to the sea and land direction. And how the city, the urban fabric as a whole, can work as a whole to address these environmental conditions. So we, in this case, understand the significance of the built environment and how we can maybe utilize it, learn from it, work on sustainable solutions for our environment. So these are some images from the simulation. There's also another system in the about the time. I just have maybe 5 minutes. Yeah, okay. The Hima, the idea of the Hima concept in the Arab world, it's a cultural-driven solution. Sorry, this should not be belonging to the Wind Tower. It's okay. Don't read the upper. The Hima culture-based community protected areas in the Arab world are actually inherited. Like if you go to the Falaj system, for example, there is a shared community who really know how they can share the sources of water. So this system already exists in the Arab world. So why don't we come back to it? And in some places it still exists, how we can emphasize it, like in the Oasis, for example. So the Hima system existed since 1500 years in this region. It was actually a communal solution to address sustainability issues since the Prophet. So in the Oasis, this was using the Sharia, the distribution of water for the different areas that exist. So I think this is also one other aspect we can think about, how we manage the water systems, for example, and using the Hima. In a way, it's a management system. I want to talk also about the idea of resilience, because when we talk about a certain equilibrium of how we address, for example, floods and disasters, the building becomes, in this case, this is actually a case from Bosnia, where the character of the traditional environment, which we can translate into the wisdom of building, how the wisdom of building actually survived these risks. So we need to learn from that as well. Oh, sorry, this is repeated. I already talked about. And then many of you probably are aware of the marshlands in Iraq, where they had certain way of managing the environment. Unfortunately, due to the dry conditions that, if you see here on the screen on the right, you have the map from 1973 and on the left from 1991. You could see the effect of the environment. So how we could maybe address this by using traditional solutions, and the colleagues are studying that. It's a World Heritage Site, by the way. How, for example, we can think about traditional techniques of grazing, this is in Socotra, also a World Heritage Site. It's an island belonging to Yemen. The dragon blood trees suffer from very weak, almost no natural regeneration. So grazing animals is one of the many reasons to weak regenerations. So shifting and changes of the traditional grazing system is a product of unplanned and not well assessed development activity. So for nature, this is a natural heritage, how we can look at the grazing practices, for example, to address these issues. I want to conclude by a few statements and conclusions by repeating somehow that cultural heritage serves as a repository of knowledge and practices that have enabled communities to adapt and withstand various challenges over time. So this will inform us by preserving and leveraging cultural heritage. Communities can draw upon sustainable practices to enhance their resilience in the face of natural hazards, climate change, and other threats that we talked about today. Talking about climate change, it pays to invest in reducing the risk. So I'm talking now about prevention and how we can be prepared, how we plan, again, how we manage change, and how we plan to manage the change affecting the significance. These are like figures just to remember. Every $1 spent doing this can save us $15 in any post-disaster or change recovery. And every $1 invested, these are from, by the way, from UNDRR, which is the UN Organization for Disaster Risk Reduction. Every $1 invested in making infrastructure disaster resilient saves us also a similar amount of money, by the way. I mean, four, okay, that would otherwise have to be spent rebuilding. So it's time to break the cycle of, thinking about change, response, restoration, and then repeating, to switching the focus from managing disasters to managing risks and managing change. So this is actually at the heart of what I want to tell you. And there is still a gap in integrating cultural heritage into national and local disaster risk reduction strategies and vice versa on the national level. To bridge this gap, we need to employ a range of strategies. One is to include cultural heritage experts and stakeholders we talked about today in policy formulation processes, and incorporate cultural heritage preservation considerations into urban planning and development frameworks, and promote community participation and ownership, and strengthen capacity building efforts, especially of communities. I think that sums up, and I don't want to repeat, but I think it's just to make sure that my message is conveyed well to you. Integrating cultural heritage into national policies is crucial for preserving our collective memory and fostering a sense of belonging and pride within communities who own this heritage. And there are a lot of benefits if we follow this approach. The benefits range from higher returns, for there will be more certainty even for investors as regards the safety of their investments in the long run. We should not think only short term. There are also, of course, as I mentioned earlier, there are a lot of other returns, also social economic benefits that you can maybe read here on the screen. And very important for the future, we're talking about the future. We talked about preservation. It's about the future. So the meaningful, tangible, and intangible heritage for future of communities. So we need to really think about participatory decision-making processes and also participation, outreach work, reviving community cultural expressions, how we can have activities in these abandoned places, for example, and how we can have a solidarity among the different actors, and how we can empower, harness the sources of traditional knowledge, as I mentioned, and how we can educate and address all these aspects that I mentioned today. So with this, I thank you very much for listening to me, and I hope that gave you a good summary of what this new approach is all about. Thank you very much.